Just briefly on Tate, which on the summary of feedback, it starts on page 5 in red text. We discussed previously on the 17th of April the provision made for offices in the Tate campus, and we've proposed, rather than a percentage of the total floor space, a figure of how much floor space could occur in the zone. We had a meeting with Tate, and one of the issues with prescribing a percentage is if there's no floor space there at the moment, then what's the percentage of? And so it's making it an absolute figure. I should point out, though, there's 3 industrial park zones proposed. There's Tate, there's the Mail site, and there's Awatea, which is off Wilmers Road. And the difficulty we've got is drawing a distinction between why one of those zones should have provision for some office space and others shouldn't. So we have applied that same provision to the other industrial park zones. Next. Yeah, council led a plan change a number of years ago, which rezoned land for housing in the Awatea block, and in doing so, it also zoned land for industry. And there's, in the provisions, it's actually one of the last subzones in the chapter. There's specific provisions to, and a number of outline development plans to ensure that interface between residential and industry is protected. So,
industrial office, basically.
We've deliberately put a cap on that quantum of office floor space so they don't become a mixed zone. They are still primarily for industrial use, but it's recognising that the industrial park zone, as opposed to a heavy industrial zone, does have a stronger element of office, and there's potentially less of a firm line between what an industrial use is and what an office use is. So.
And how do you distinguish? So, for example, if you're in an office doing CAD/CAM design or something, how do you distinguish between that and an office where the people are using their computers for different things?
It's an assessment on a case-by-case basis.
It's quite tricky, actually, isn't it?
This will be a rule that will be open to scrutiny, I think, when it goes to the hearing panel, given what it says under LERP and the regional plan change about industrial zones being used primarily for industrial. So we'll just have to see how this goes.
What is industrial? How is it classified?
Is the LERP here?
I don't have my definitions to hand, but I can return to that later.
But just looking at the Christchurch industry and how much of IT is coming out of Christchurch, industry here is probably not manufacturing as we used to know it, and that's probably a relatively small percentage, is it?
We're just looking up the definition for you.
Okay.
Just to recall, though, that, as I said in the past, the industrial land has been used a lot more openly and far less restrictively for uses other than industrial land. And so, of course, there is a reaction to trying to tighten this down just for industrial activities.
The definition of industrial in the regional policy statement is that it means the manufacturing, assembly, packaging, wholesaling or storage of products or the processing of raw materials or other ancillary activities.
From memory, our definition in the proposed plan is broader than that, and in my mind would capture some elements of ICT, but we have a separate term for the likes of ICT called high technology industrial activity, which does capture at least the computer side of the high tech business, but is still called an industrial activity.
And Tate used to have more of a manufacturing side to it, of course, which would have fitted this industrial definition. However, it's changed its direct, I guess, output.
So just to clarify, in the industrial park zones, high technology industrial activity is permitted, and I can supply the definition of that to you separately.
Just a question to you guys, is our definition of industrial still appropriate?
I'll bring it to the table,
Okay.
but it is broader than traditional manufacturing, for instance.
There has been close attention to making sure that the definitions used are appropriate for the way we intend that term to be used for the zones. So the plan isn't proposing to set up an office park zone where you can't set up office parks.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Tate's recently made some changes within its own business is, in a way, an example of what we were talking about previously, that this whole sector is changing all the time. And so to allow for some, I guess, what we'd call traditional office actually just takes into account that there may be co-location businesses that want to be around this space. And it may kind of be office-y, but they might be high-tech at the same time. So that whole sector is quite sort of changeable, so it's quite difficult to be prescriptive. So, and I think this is a good solution.
I think nobody will deny what you're saying, but I do need to bring us back to the LERP where it talks about industry, and if I can just find the page. Not yet. There's somewhere it talks about industry and industrial land not being used for higher purposes or higher value purposes. So office land, for example, and that's where we have to be very careful or could draw submissions from various parties about this type of rule.
It also shows how difficult it is these days to be prescriptive in a more traditional way, when it was very clear what manufacturing was.
That's right.
High-tech was, and now it's all starting to break down.
Yeah. The challenge for us is we need to draw a line, otherwise if that line's not drawn, then there'll be others take advantage of that line, and
that's right.
or the absence of a line, and we'll potentially develop land that's intended for industry for non-industrial use.
So for instance, Tate or high-tech industries perhaps do go into office areas rather than industrial areas in the future.
Sorry, what was the example?
Manufacture through 3D printing some product. Am I a high-tech or an industry?
You're manufacturing a product, so you're potentially in the industrial definition.
Okay, exactly.
Well, there is home and enterprise rules in the residential chapter. It's a matter of scale here. This is a matter of scale more than anything.
But how about a healthy product? They belong to industrial, or, for instance, the placenta, this kind of biochemistry. Healthy product. This for
Health foods?
no, healthy product. More and more popular in New Zealand made, then exported to overseas.
Sorry, what's your question?
My question is whether it belong to the industrial zone or it's a separate.
Any manufacturing?
Still in the industrial.
Yes.
Okay.
Can locate in the industrial
Just
areas.
want to know whether it's separate.
Shall we move on? Yeah. Shall we move on? Southwest Hornby?
Right. Just so you're aware in terms of where we're going, I'm just taking you through some of the area-specific issues, and then I'll come back to the issue of offices and retail and industrial zones, and touch on the generic issues that came through. Just on the next slide, pages 6 to 8 of the summary of feedback relates to an area that we're proposing to rezone called Southwest Hornby, and if you look at map 3 of your package of maps, map 3 is a large area, 170 hectares of proposed industrial land, and it's got frontage to Main South Road, and you all got there? In the top left, towards the top left corner, there's a small area. It's part of what's Templeton. There's a residential area fronting Main South Road. And on the original outline development plan that went out for public consultation, it showed this main spine road running through the industrial area and then continuing up through the residential area where that dashed line is drawn. And we've removed that dashed line from the ODP on the basis that there's a need, if there's any future spine road connecting with Main South Road to provide access for this industrial area to the state highway, there'll be a need to, if it were to go through that block, it would need to be designated, and there'd be a need to consider alternatives to that. So to address the concerns that have come through from feedback from residents in that area, we've effectively deferred consideration of where that route goes and meets Main South Road.
Not the Waterloo industrial park? It's separate.
No, the Waterloo Industrial Park is on the north side of the railway line and State Highway, so that's on this edge of the map.
Part of it.
Yeah, a part of it. Just touching on another area-specific issue, if you refer to map 4, which is in Belfast, it's a future industrial area that's proposed for rezoning through the industrial chapter. This is 100 hectares and is bordered, you might, excuse me. It's bordered to the west by Main North Road, State Highway 1, and this site, there was feedback about providing, this outline development plan shows a spine road which runs right through the ODP area from Main North Road in the north down to Belfast Road in the south. And this land is effectively to the north and to the east of the existing Silverfin Farms freezing works in Belfast. And there's been feedback that has sought a link road that runs between Main North Road and the Spine Road as a secondary point of access. And we've not included that access road on the ODP deliberately because, to address that feedback, because there's not been evident, we haven't had sufficient information to demonstrate that the effects on the state highway of another intersection won't affect its function or the safety or efficiency of that state highway. So we haven't added a secondary link to the state. That's right. The area that's got the red lines through it on that plan, there's a landowner there who has sought residential zoning of the land, but this is a greenfield business area, and part of their concern relates to the extent of the setback that's required from residential properties to the south, and that setback, because it's 15 metres, it does remove potentially a significant area of land, but that setback has to be at some point in the ODP area, so we're proposing to retain that land as an industrial zone.
West one, in the Shands Road sort of area, what sort of soil type is there at the moment?
What was the question, sorry?
What's the soil? Is it good for growing or is it not?
I understand that stormwater can be discharged to ground through infiltration, subject to treatment, but I couldn't tell you the soil type offhand, sorry.
Okay, and just geographically, looking at the number of new business parks and the amount of industry in the southwest, particularly around this area, because you've got the new Waterloo subdivision up there, have we spread them sufficiently such that people aren't all coming from the east to work in the west or from the north to work in the west, sort of thing? Have we actually overpopulated the southwest with industry, basically?
This area and the other areas in the southwest came about through much earlier work than proposed change 1. The council developed a southwest area plan over a period of 10 years, and that identified future growth areas not just for business but for housing. And with the sheer growth in population in the southwest, then there's going to be obviously demand for business as well. And it appears that there has been some business relocation from the east. So Skellerup, for instance, has gone to Wigram, and this land that's being developed by Calder Stewart, there's significant demand for land in this area. So we need to ensure that there's adequate land that's suitable on suitable ground, and the greenfield areas such as this are close to the Southern Motorway Stage 2 as proposed, or near the existing Southern Motorway, and so they do have strategic benefits as a location for industry. But in saying that, we're also looking to retain existing industrial areas in the east, such as Woolston and Bromley, to recognise they still have a role for industry, but you're right, there's a need to ensure there's business close to where people live, and in the southwest, with the significant growth in population, we think there's still going to be for some a short commute because of their proximity to these areas.
Like geographic spread of industry or anything? Do we have any concept of that?
These areas reflect the land use recovery plan and PC1 before that, which identified these areas as greenfield areas. And generally speaking, those growth areas are the southwest and the north around Belfast. The same for residential. The northwest, as we've talked about, has constraints, and the east obviously is built up. So it's
or not built up at the moment. Yeah. So in this one, likewise, good off-road cycle routes as a requirement.
we can
Put them in.
review the provisions around that, but this is close to the area that I commented on earlier, which there's land further to the east of this, which is Officer James Waddy Drive, which is currently under development at the moment. Sleepyhead of a factory being built there, and it's that area that there was a rule requiring a cycleway through the landscaped area, but because council's planning a cycleway on Marshes Road on the south side, it doesn't necessitate a cycleway that runs parallel to that a short distance away.
Madam Chair, perhaps if I can just respond to your question about the distribution of industrial areas. It's a good question, and you'll be aware that some of the factories in the eastern areas have been badly damaged, destroyed, or even demolished, some of the areas in the east. But and I notice that most of you don't have your maps with you today, but there are still small areas for industrial land. Greater in the Sydenham area, there are some still in Woolston, and there are some in Bromley. So if you like, we can give you just a large map of the city. So there is still some distribution there. However, some of that land will need to be remediated.
General principle in large developments like this, like these roads around here are terrifying for cyclists to go on. Literally terrifying. Actually, they're quite terrifying for cars. Unless you're a big heavy truck, it's quite scary out this way. So I'm just really keen that we actually make sure that unless there's a cycleway sort of 10 metres away or something, that we actually do ensure that cycleways and walking access is there. Like, it's really important, I think, that we actually integrate these with the neighbourhoods around them. They've tended to be quite exclusionary in the way that they look, and the big heavy roads of huge trucks around them. And I'm sure that's what the others would like for the Belfast area as well. Yeah.
In relation to Southwest Hornby and your point 6.2 on the comments on page 6, you may or may not be aware we had a number of submissions to the annual plan process on exactly that issue, and we heard from a number of residents of Foreman's Road in particular who came to speak to their submissions as part of the annual plan hearings process. Can we be assured that you'll be taking that information into account as part of your considerations as well, even though it didn't come in as part of the comments on the district plan process? Because there were some of those submissions that perhaps would have in fact been more appropriate to have been put into this process than into the annual plan process.
As the unit manager planning, a number of annual plan submissions were sent to me that were directly related to the district plan review and weren't really relevant to the annual plan as such. And so, yes, I am very aware of those submissions. I've read them, and yes, we are aware of them.
Regarding to the map 3, the two questions. One is on page 6, the southwest Hornby, or page 7. Regarding to the 6.5, the identification stormwater facility on the ODP is not necessary as retention, infiltration basin are not proposed. I can understand what's the rationale, and also this one is also in the Sir James the Waddy Drive industrial area, also have this kind of issue, same issue. Can you explain to us?
Yeah, the stormwater proposals for this block and for the neighbouring block, rather than the traditional approach which you often see in greenfield areas of a large ponded area where the stormwater is treated, there's also the ability to manage stormwater from each individual site and for the stormwater infrastructure to remain as a private asset within these areas, and that's what the owners of or developers of this block are proposing at this stage to have individual treatment and infiltration of that stormwater from each individual property and the road environment as well. So effectively it removes the need for large ponded areas that you traditionally see. So.
Sorry Yanni, I've had a number of emails from people on Marshes Road. You've gone from 50 metres to 20 metres?
There's the setback adjoining Marshes Road along here. It's been reduced from 40 metres down to 20 metres.
50 to 20?
40 to 20.
Oh, sorry. I'm reading 6.8.
Oh, sorry, 6.8. There's a residential property within the southwest area, southwest Hornby area. There's a number of properties along there, but the resident there has sort of 50 metre setback, and 15 metres setback from those boundaries is a significant area, and applying a consistent approach to setbacks between industrial zones and residential zones, we've proposed some consistency there. So 20 metres is considered to provide that adequate buffer as opposed to 50, which would be a sizable area of land and would sterilise that. It's 50 metres deep, so multiply that by the length and it's a sizable area. So it's felt that a buffer and other controls such as recession planes to avoid shading and also use of that space for landscaping can avoid impacts on that resident.